We're back with the final part of Unreleased Virtual Boy. At this point, you may be wondering, was there ever a Mahjong game in development? What about a proper Mario title, or any of Nintendo's iconic 90s racing games? All those questions and more will be answered in this episode, so let's jump right into it. This is Retro Impressions Unreleased Virtual Boy. Mario Land is one of the most curious cases of all unreleased games for the Virtual Boy. A playable prototype of the game was showcased on a couple of occasions prior to the system's launch, giving us the footage you're now looking at. The game was created in the style of the original Super Mario Bros. While implementing a two-layer system that required the player to move between the background and foreground as part of the play mechanic. This is the same design that would later be used in Wario Land. Also included in Mario Land was a full remake of the original Mario Bros. Arcade release. For those familiar with the system, you're likely thinking, hey, this game did release, and it did. Nintendo lifted the minigame portion from Mario Land and released it under the title Mario Clash. I found it interesting that Mario Clash, the unreleased Mario Land, and Wario Land were all developed by Nintendo R&D 1, headed by Gunpei Yokoi, the same team behind the original Mario Land series for the Game Boy, which later turned into a Wario Land series. Gunpei Yokoi was also the co-creator for the original Mario Bros. Arcade game, something seldom acknowledged, and certainly a driving factor behind the creation of Mario Clash. So why does this matter? By the time the Virtual Boy launched, Mario Land was no longer being showcased or discussed. In fact, even on the Virtual Boy console box, you can see the advertisements for both Mario Clash and a new game, Wario Land. Let's back up to the beginning once more to put this in perspective. Nintendo had attended Space World in November 1994 and Winter CES in January 1995, where Mario Land was showcased. When E3 took place in May 1995, Mario Land was gone, Mario Clash had been pulled into its own game, and a new game called Wario's Cruise was announced. Considering the Wario game was announced after Mario Clash was separated, and Wario Land contains all the shown gameplay mechanics from the Mario Land prototype, I think it's very likely that Wario Land is indeed the unreleased Mario Land game, reworked from that early development showcased concept into the actual game Nintendo R&D 1 really wanted to make. So while the early prototype may remain unreleased, I'm unsure if the game itself ultimately isn't the game released as Wario Land. Virtual Block appears to be heavily inspired by Arkanoid and other Breakout-style games. The key difference in Virtual Block is you have two slimes that act as the vessel by which the player controls the ball. I'm guessing these are inspired by Dragon Quest, given the name and design. It's another game that appears to have been close to complete. A playable demo was on hand for Space World 1995, with December announced as the release date. The game also received a ton of coverage in gaming magazines. So what happened? The game was developed by Bottom Up, who also acted as their own publisher. Looking over their library, we can see that they never released a game outside of Japan. I think it's clear poor sales of the hardware in Japan meant it was too risky to release a Japanese exclusive on a platform that might not sell through the minimum order Nintendo required to manufacture a game on its platform. Virtual Dodgeball, also known as Virtual Battle Ball and Virtual Handball, was under development by Hecht. This wasn't a dodgeball game in the traditional sense, but a play on Pong, with the main mechanic focused on causing damage rather than getting your puck past your opponent. This appears to be another game that was far into development when cancelled. Hecht has been out of business for around 2 decades, and over that time, no new information has come to light. Virtual Double Yakuman was a 3D addition to the extremely popular Japanese Game Boy exclusive Double Yakuman. According to the developer ImageSoft, their game was the second best-selling Mahjong title released for the Game Boy, the first being Nintendo's Yakuman, which was a launch title for the system in Japan. There's not a ton to say here, as it's a Mahjong game, giving it the most limited appeal possible outside of Japan. Double Yakuman received 2 sequels on the Game Boy, which were both well received. The game for the Virtual Boy is speculated to have 2-player support, and was complete, with the release being pushed back due to Nintendo delaying the release of their 2-player link cable. The cable never released, and thus the game was cancelled. A couple of years back, someone from the development team shared some details regarding the game, including pictures of the machine used for creating it. They also stated that the game didn't release due to poor hardware sales. I imagine that the truth is somewhere in between. Virtual Gunman is yet another game that looks to have been nearly complete. The game is set in the near future and was an on-rails shooter. Not much is really known about the game itself, and though it was previewed at Space World in '95, no footage is currently known to exist. Virtual Gunman was listed under development by Victor, which is questionable for a couple of reasons. First off, Victor primarily was a distributor, developing less than 10% of the games released under their brand. They also were wrapping up their studio at this time. Starting with the Sega CD, they had built a close relationship with Sega, releasing nearly every game developed in-house exclusively on Sega platforms, something that was clearly tied to Victor's right to manufacture and distribute their own branded Sega systems. As we exit 1996, there's a couple instances where they developed and released the game outside of this, and that was exclusively on the PlayStation. Ultimately, we just don't know. As 96 was wrapping up, Victor was prepping to exit their solo involvement in the games industry, something they would fully do by 1998. If you don't live in Japan, you may not be aware of just how popular the horse racing genre is. The G1 Jockey series consists of 5 games, Gallop Racer has 12 installments, and Winning Post is on Winning Post 9, with over 35 total games released in the series dating all the way back to 1993. There are other popular games in the genre that have fewer games, such as Derby Stallion and Stakes Winner. So yeah, to say it's popular would be a massive understatement. In addition to the big 5 franchises I mentioned, a number of other teams created one-off releases. Right Stuff was one of these, developing Virtual Jockey for the Virtual Boy. Their concept was to focus on the life of a jockey and his interaction with people and horses. Winning the heart of a girl was just as important as winning the next race. The game appeared to be very close to release, and then radio silence. It's impossible to know what happened with the Virtual Boy version of this game, or if there was intentions to release it with the Virtual Boy relaunch that never happened. I personally found it shocking that this game does very much exist and is playable as Right Stuff ported it to the PlayStation under the name Jockey Zero, making it one of the only games to receive a port from the Virtual Boy to another system. This game was well received and remains a Japanese exclusive to this day. Virtual League Baseball 2, also known as Virtual Pro Baseball 96, is the follow-up title to Kemco's prior baseball game on the same system. The original wasn't well received, and this was essentially a roster update with added 2-player support, so it's doubtful any minds would have been changed had it released. This is another game that clearly didn't release as Nintendo never released the link cable needed for 2-player support, the only reason someone might consider making this purchase. Wagon Sensen Red City is a game developed by Asmic, a company that's still in business as of this video's release. The game was essentially a Missile Command clone. There's not any additional information out there that would indicate that the game does anything truly unique or interesting outside of a stereoscopic effect. Red City was demoed in at least one trade show, and the ROM has long been rumored to exist in a private collection. Worms has been talked about for some time as being in development for a couple weeks, only to be cancelled when Team 17 learned that the Virtual Boy wouldn't release outside of North America and Japan. While it's an interesting take, it's not entirely true. Martin Brown, who was a creative director for Worms, was asked about this in 2008 and issued this statement. "Sorry to disappoint you, but work never really started on Worms for the Virtual Boy. We basically declined to develop it after we had to mess around and looked at the machine, which we felt was doomed to failure, and were largely proved correct. Our publisher on the project, Ocean Software, never pursued interest after the initial idea. We kept the kit for about 10 years until it was recently returned to a museum over at Nintendo Germany." With the Virtual Boy gearing up for relaunch in 1996, Nintendo switched their focus to pushing the newly announced $99 price point along with 3 games, Dragon Hopper, Bound High, and G-Zero, also known as Zero Racers, a spin-off of the F-Zero series. All 3 games were showcased at E3 in May 1996, though G-Zero has the least amount of details regarding it at the show. It was briefly discussed in the E3 review issue of Nintendo Power, with a full 2-page spread discussing the game in the July 1996 publication. The game was essentially F-Zero, but in a rocket ship, allowing for movement up and down in addition to the left and right. Now clearly, a game being previewed in July for hardware that had been discontinued in December pending a relaunch that never happened is key to why the game never released. I think what's most shocking is the game received its ESRB rating in anticipation of releasing that summer, a great indicator that it was complete, yet no real accounts from anyone who played the game exist, nor does any footage of it in action. There seems to be a bit of confusion regarding games that are seen by some as being tech demos, while also being pushed by other publications as full games under development for release. I'm going to cover the 2 I find most interesting, as these titles were under development by Nintendo, so let's have a look. First up is a Formula 1 racing game without a name. The demo appeared at a couple shows, and we even have a bit of footage showcasing the game in action. The game has a pole position look to it, as should be expected from this era. The game was talked about on at least 2 occasions in Famitsu as being in development for release on the system, putting doubt to the idea that it was only a tech demo. With that said, no one really knows for sure. Mario Kart is another game surrounded in mass confusion. From what I can tell, the only mention of it being in development is in the German magazine The Big N, which did a 6-page spread on the history of the system, even giving a list of cancelled games. This was published in 2000, more than 4 years after Nintendo put the Virtual Boy to bed. Now, there's reason to argue that this could be correct, as the rest of the list is essentially spot on. However, I find it hard to believe that the only mention of this game is 4 years after the hardware was discontinued. In 2008, Planet Virtual Boy held a coding competition, and user Dog P created a demo for Mario Kart. This has led to the prior mentioned mass confusion, as some media outlets reported that this was indeed a lost prototype. In fact, the rumor continues to persist, as a few people have dug in with their belief that this was the prototype and Dog P is taking credit for work not his own. Clearly, this isn't the case, but certainly it's an interesting example of how a couple of poorly researched gaming news articles can taint facts for years down the road. That's it for Virtual Boy Unreleased. I'm sure by now you've noticed a common theme not seen with other consoles I've covered. Nintendo kept hope alive for the system's future, even pushing new games and a budget hardware relaunch. Support was dropped in December of 1995, yet Nintendo would continue to push this idea of support being on the horizon up through July of 1996. This in turn gave a glimmer of hope to many development teams who were queuing up for the supposed high-profile launch in 1996, with hopes of capturing some of the market and recouping their development cost. After stringing development teams along for 7 months, Nintendo pulled the plug without any fanfare. The end result was the cancellation of an insane quantity of games that were close to or were ready to ship, a revelation that must have been very shocking and frustrating for those working on getting their games out on time. It's an incredibly unique situation that has no other comparison, especially considering these games depended on hardware which was so unique they wouldn't be able to easily find a second life on another platform. I want to give a huge shout out to Planet Virtual Boy, whose incredible community has worked tirelessly to catalog and track down everything Virtual Boy related. Specifically, I want to thank Benjamin Stevens, who's almost solely responsible for finding and translating almost every document we have from Japan regarding the system and its games. That's it for now, and until next time, thank you for watching Retro Impressions.